Hey guys, so you ready for today's October 22nd, 2024, 8:06 a.m. Central Time. Truth about DOD Directive 5240.01, lethal force against civilians regarding the military. So, this was again sent to me on my last video by someone asking me to do a video on this, and I've gotten it through X, I got it through a different YouTube video, and I gotten through my email as most recent. So I decided to stop everything I'm doing this morning and dive deep into this, and I went into this in a nauseating degree. It went in so many different directions. I learned way too much about this than I ever wanted to learn. So I pulled up some documents. The only thing I know about this situation that people are talking about is what people have sent me. Like Ricky on my last video said gun channels are picking this up, probably because it's lethal force and shooting someone is lethal force. Ron Paul talked about this on X. Everything that I've seen that people have sent me is all coming back to a simple article by Zero Hedge that quote unquote broke this story. However, Zero Hedge's article is fucking terrible. Terrible. All it does is kind of light the fire under conspiracy or light the flame for the internet to go crazy. It didn't explain anything at all. It just said, hey, this exists. This is a change in policy. Oh my God, everybody be aware of it. Yes, this is a change in policy, but there's a lot more to it. The DOD Directive 5240.01, in order to understand it, it references a different directive that references another directive and so forth and so on. And I've pulled those, and I'm going to show you how this is going down, right? In order to understand any DOD directive, law, proclamations, executive orders, rule changes, you name it, whatever comes out of this government, always references something else. And you have to look into the actual reference to understand what you're reading in your face. Because otherwise, certain things can sound scary as hell. So, this is a little disturbing, don't get me wrong. But there's more to it. Now, I'm going to go into all of it. I'm going to show you all of it. So it's not my opinion. This is truth. This is fact. Now, regarding the timing of this coming out, obviously the whole thing that I'm seeing is everyone's concerned, this is coming out because of the election, blah, blah, blah. That could be true. I'm not going to dismiss that. However, the more likely idea of this coming out and reasoning this is coming out is probably due to the fact on August 14th, lawmakers pushed the Pentagon for clarity on domestic military deployments. So between August 14th and when this was distributed out to them, September 27, 2024, and then obviously released to the public in October, is not in the realm of saying, oh, this was actually a response to that stupid letter. In my opinion, that's exactly why this came out when it did. Just quickly here, this came out Military Times August 15th. On August 14th, the letter was sent to Secretary Austin and Joint Chiefs Chairman General C.Q. Brown. Representatives Elisa Slotkin of Michigan and Murky Sherrill of New Jersey asked the leaders to clarify, publicly explain the limits of military use for domestic issues, calling it a matter of, quote, essential to maintaining our democracy, end quote, in the near future. Couple lines from the letter were, quote, we feel compelled to look ahead to the decisions that you, as the most senior defense officials, may be called upon in the next 6 months. These decisions will fall squarely into the constitutional rules that you swore to uphold, and we know you both respect. We are relying on you to preserve the system that our founding fathers designed, end quote. So the timing of this would be appropriate to that request in that letter from Democrats. Since this is a Democrat administration, obviously Austin was appointed or nominated and then appointed by the Senate, but beside the point, by Biden. Okay, so they're going to respond a little faster to Democrats than they would Republicans. But beside the point, timing is obvious, in my opinion. Yeah, it could be election related, but it's good to know lawmakers actually asked for this, okay? So this directive, 5240.01, actually amended the August 27, 2007 DOD intelligence activities, which is what I actually found and read, and all it did was add it went into depth and many other things, but in the section that is concerned about getting involved with local law enforcement, it added the section that people are concerned about. But I did find in the August 27, 2007 directive, this was funny, because all of it's regarding intelligence. It's not physically getting involved with local law enforcement. So 4.9, under no circumstances shall any DOD component or DOD employee engage in or conspire to engage in assassination. That was amusing. I thought it was funny anyway. So moving on, the question to this is actually, when would this even apply? And I have an answer for that. Because it says 3.3 levels of authority. Subject to paragraph 3.1, defense intelligence components may provide personnel to assist a federal agency or department, federal law enforcement agency, or state or local law enforcement agency when lives are in danger in response to a request for such assistance in accordance with the following approval authorities. And it goes into the Secretary of Defense approval, and I'll go into this stuff. But it's like, when would the state ask for the military to come in? Because they have National Guard, and governors deal with that stuff. So if they're asking for military assistance, they're actually asking for the Army or the Marines. And in order to do that, I don't think that would be a true request coming from a state going through the DOD. That's something that would go through the president. And in that instance, that's when the Insurrection Act would be invoked by the president. And the posse comitatus rule obviously says you can't use lethal force against American civilians. But if you invoke the Insurrection Act, it temporarily suspends posse comitatus rule. That's important to know. So although there may be a request from a state asking for military assistance with local law enforcement, likely would be Marines that get deployed, but Army could, whoever. That would likely go through the president. And if the president didn't invoke the Insurrection Act, then this really doesn't, this lethal force, this is a policy move. And yes, it is a policy change, but this policy move by DOD is not law. It does not supersede posse comitatus. What supersedes it is the Insurrection Act. If the Insurrection Act is invoked because a state asked for it, and the president invokes it, that suspends posse comitatus, which then this policy is very scary. Because yes, lethal force at that point is listed. So in general, though, I don't see a state or local law enforcement asking DOD for military assistance straight up themselves. I really don't in any case. So the little line of engagement I just said is very important, though. State asks for military assistance like Marines or Army, goes to the president invokes the Insurrection Act, which then suspends posse comitatus, which then Defense Austin approves the deployment of those Marines or Army to that state for whatever reason, and this policy then can be enforced. That's how this would get done. It's so I had to figure out the whole circular knowledge of this in order to understand this. So that's how this would work. And that situation, if the Insurrection Act is invoked by the president and then Defense Austin approves the deployment, this is frightening because posse comitatus does get suspended temporarily. Now, last time the Insurrection Act was actually used, I believe, was in the 90s when the state of California asked the president for backup in Los Angeles for the riots, and they sent in Marines. During that time period, that policy did not include lethal force. In this instance, it could possibly include lethal force. So that's kind of how that would work. I was giving you that example so you'd understand it. So anyway, it says a decision to approve requests for these types of permissible assistance described in paragraph 3.2 to law enforcement agencies and other civilian authorities are reserved to the Secretary of Defense. And then it says A, B, C, and D. Provision of personnel to support response efforts for civilian disturbances, which may also require presidential authorization, again, would be the Insurrection Act. B, DOD response chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, high-yield explosive incidents. And C, this is the one people are having a problem with, assistance in responding with assets with potential for lethality, or any situation in which it is reasonably foreseeable that providing the requested assistance may involve the use of force that is likely to result in lethal force, including death or serious bodily injury. It also includes all support to civilian law enforcement officials in situations where a confrontation between civilian law enforcement and civilian individuals or groups is reasonably anticipated. And then this is the part people are leaving out that I saw. Such use of force may be in accordance with DOD 5210.56, potentially as further restricted based on specifics of the request supported. I'm going to show you that directive. Then it says D, provisions of the use of DOD unmanned systems, which would be drones, in the United States, except as delegated by the Secretary of Defense pursuant to October 31st, 2023 Secretary of Defense memorandum. So they could technically, I think the Air Force would be the one dealing with unmanned systems, but I have no idea. Anyway, so the Directive 5210.56, what that's talking about is restrictions. And that is this. 5210.56 DOD Directive came out, change effective, okay. Came out in 2016, but the change went into effect in 2020. What this is talking about is arming and use of force. This, again, references a different directive that I have pulled up. So let's scroll down to the highlighted area. Use of force and the performance of official duties. First of all, before they kill you, they're required to do warning shots. So the warning shots are fired over water to warn approaching vessel. A clear line of fire exists. The shots are fired from crew service weapon or rifle. The shots are fired from personnel who are certified under a training program approved by the military department, blah, 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 blah. So they have to actually send out warning shots before anything were to happen. Then it says less than deadly force, use of force. Force may be used when there is probable cause to believe it is reasonable to accomplish lawful performance of assigned duties. The amount of force must be reasonable when assessed under the totality of the circumstances leading to the need for force. Then this is where another directive is listed. DOD Directive 3000.03E establishes policy for the development and employment of NLWs. I'll go into what that is. For purpose of this issuance and its context of use of force, the term less than deadly force is used as there is no guarantee that NLWs will cause severe injury or death. And it says less than deadly force may be used reasonable to defend oneself from actual or imminent threat of physical injury or death. B, to defend other persons from actual imminent threat or injury or death. C, to become the active or passive resistance offered to a lawful detention, arrest, or apprehension, or to accomplish lawful performance of assigned duties. D, to prevent the escape of a prisoner. E, to prevent the destruction of DOD property. And F, to control, restrain animals presented ongoing or imminent threat of bodily harm against oneself or others. Then it talks about deadly force under E. Number 3, an oral warning must be given to use deadly force if the situation permits, and if doing so does not unreasonably increase the danger to DOD personnel. 4, deadly force may be used when reasonable, including but not limited to under the following circumstances. A, self-defense and defense of other DOD personnel. Authorized DOD personnel may use deadly force in order to defend themselves or DOD personnel in their vicinity when there is probable cause to believe the target of the force poses an actual or imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. B, defense of others. Won't even go into that situation. C, protecting assets vital to national security. D, protecting inherently dangerous property. E, protecting national critical infrastructure, which would be the Capitol. F, performing an arrest or apprehension or preventing escape. And then G, defending against animals. Deadly force may be directed against vicious animals when necessary in self-defense of others. So here's the deal. It is important to look up Directive 3000.03E because it's talking about NLWs. NLWs are non-lethal weapons. This came out August 25th, 2023, incorporating the change August 31st, 2018. Subject DOD agent for non-lethal weapons and non-lethal weapons policy, NLW. So, first of all, the NLW are explicitly designed and primarily deployed to incapacitate personnel or material immediately, while minimizing fatality, permanent injury, or personnel, and undesired damage to property, facilities, material, and the environment. And it goes into NLWs are capable of delivering a level of force that achieves immediate target response and can provide predictable and intended reversible effects, allowing the affected target to return to pre-engagement functionality. In other words, it doesn't kill you. NLWs are developed and used with the intent to minimize the probability of producing fatalities, significant or permanent injuries, or undesired damage to material, but do not and are not intended to eliminate the risk of those actions entirely. Because I'm sure if you got shot with a rubber bullet in the right place and it's soft tissue, you might have a problem. But anyway, NLW, weapons, devices, and munitions, okay, includes all of them, that are explicitly designed and primarily deployed to incapacitate target personnel and material immediately while minimizing fatalities, permanent injury to personnel, and undesired damage to property in the target area of environment. NLWs are intended to have reversible effects on personnel and material. That's actual definition of it. So what this is saying, okay, here we go. In the September 2024 directive that people are concerned about, 5240.01, it references DOD 5210.56 as the restrictions of what the policy is, what the military would have to follow in order for C, which is the lethal force, to even occur. So that directive, again, mentions they have to do warning shots before they even actually shoot you. And these are important things to know, because if you end up in a situation like this, and some military, which I would hate to figure out a Marine did this or anybody did this, but if a Marine ends up in a vicinity where you are and helping local law enforcement, and you end up getting shot and killed, your family needs to know that they were supposed to send off warning shots, and they actually have to give you an oral warning prior to the use of deadly force. So there are guidelines that have to happen prior to that occurring. And one of those guidelines, besides an oral warning and a warning shot, is actually they have to use non-lethal weapons first, which is the NLWs, which would be like rubber bullets, flashbangs, gas. I mean, what else do they use? Bean bags. I mean, there's a lot of non-lethal weapons out there that the fucking law enforcement, like local law enforcement, use as it is. But the military is required to do that too. So this isn't just a one-off shot, like we're sending the Marines to the Capitol Hill. Like if we're talking about January 6th again, we're sending the Marines there. They're going to get deployed. They're going to back up, actually be full federal law enforcement at that point. And you do something out of the ordinary, the military has to go through these bullet points before they can respond when the federal agency, in that circumstance, law enforcement, can actually respond very quickly in a very different sequence that could kill you faster. Okay, is what I'm trying to say. Local law enforcement can kill you faster in this type of situation than a Marine or Army could do. The Army has to go through these bullet points in order for this to happen. The local law enforcement do not. So keep that in mind. So yes, this is a change in policy. Yes, it is a disturbing change in policy. But there are, again, bullet points that have to happen prior to your ass getting killed. Warning shot. Using non-lethal weapons. Oral warning as well before they shoot your ass, and then they shoot you. So I guess if they go through that whole scenario and you're still a fucking problem and you've got a gun and you're not listening to anything, I mean, if local law enforcement isn't there to shoot you, then I guess a Marine or an Army troop would be there to shoot you. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Don't be a fucking problem, okay, and be a serious threat. It's one thing to protest and go somewhere and yell and scream and whine and whatever and block stuff, whatever you want to say. Don't be a lethal threat and you won't have this issue. But beside the point, I'll end this with this. When can the president invoke the Insurrection Act? Troops can be deployed under 3 sections of the Insurrection Act. The SCOTUS has ruled twice on this situation, and it is listed here, and I'll go into it. Each of these sections are designed for a different set of situations. Unfortunately, the law's requirements are poorly explained, leaving virtually everything up to discretion of the president, which is true. Section 521 of the Insurrection Act allows the president to deploy troops if a state's legislature or governor, if the legislature is unavailable, requests federal aid to suppress an insurrection in the state. This provision is the oldest part of the law and the one that has most often been invoked. Section 251 requires state consent. Section 252 and 253 allow the president to deploy troops without a request from the affected state. That's important to know. Even against a state's wishes. Section 252 permits deployment in order to enforce the laws, the United States, or to suppress rebellion whenever unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblies or rebellions make it impractical to enforce federal law in the state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. Section 253 has 2 parts. The first allows the president to use military in a state to suppress, quote, any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy, so that hinders the execution of laws. That any portion of the states inhibits are deprived of a constitutional right and state authorities are unable or unwilling to protect that right. President Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy relied on this provision to deploy troops to desegregated schools in the South after the Supreme Court's landmark decision, Brown versus Board of Education. The second part of 253 permits the president to deploy troops to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy in a state that, quote, opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States or impedes the course of justice under those laws. And that says this provision is so baffling broad, and I agree with that, it is bafflingly broad, that is cannot possibly mean what it says, or else it authorizes the president to use military against any 2 people conspiring to break the federal law, which by interpretation, that's kind of true. But here are the 2 cases, okay? Nothing in this text of the Insurrection Act defines insurrection, rebellion, domestic violence, or any other key term used set forth the prerequisite for deployment. Absent statutory guidance, the Supreme Court decided early on that this question is for the president to decide alone. In the 1827 case Martin versus Mott, the court ruled that, quote, the authority to decide whether requiring a militia to be called out has arisen belongs exclusively to the president, and his decision is conclusive upon all other persons, end quote. So that's frightening. However, while this precedent might prevent judges from second-guessing whether the president is allowed to invoke the Insurrection Act, is response to a given situation, the Supreme Court clarified in Sterling versus Constantine in 1932 that the courts may still review the lawfulness of the military's actions once deployed. So in other words, after the fact. In other words, federal troops are not free to violate other laws or trample constitutional rights just because the president has invoked the Insurrection Act. And then it says here, is it the same as declaring martial law? Of course it's not. Has martial law ever been invoked or declared? The president has no authority to declare martial law, first of all. So, and it says it's been used numerous times in the past. For example, let's see. They use the designate. Okay, here. The Insurrection Act was last invoked in 1992 when the governor of California requested military aid from President George H.W. Bush in response to civil unrest in Los Angeles that followed an acquittal of 4 white police officers charged with beating a black motorist, Rodney King. At 29 years and counting, this is the longest period the United States has ever gone without invoking the Insurrection Act since. So it's important to know these few bullet points. Okay? In order for the Marines or the Army, I'm going to say those specifically, to be deployed with local law enforcement, we'll say federal because, federal too, but let's dismiss federal for a second. Local law enforcement, to be in your area, to wherever you are, the likelihood of the Marines and the Army, one or the other or both, being deployed there was not by request of the state asking Secretary Austin. It was more likely than not asked of the president. The president then either okayed it, and then the request went to Austin, who automatically okays it and deploys those troops or Marines. Then that policy that they have since put in that includes lethal force against civilians gets put into play. That policy also states there has to be bullet points prior to actually killing your ass. They have to do warning shots. They have to use non-lethal weapons. They have to verbally actually tell you, I'm going to shoot you or something of that nature before they actually shoot and kill your ass, okay? So it's not like they're going to be there and just start shooting people, okay? And the other route that would go, which is actually the more disturbing route, is if, and a state doesn't even have to ask for it, is if the president invokes the Insurrection Act, which therefore temporarily suspends posse comitatus, okay, which is the protection of military using lethal force against civilians. That's a problem. That is more of your problem, because I could see the DOD Directives policy regarding lethal force and the little bullet points they're supposed to do before shooting your ass being dismissed under the situation the Insurrection Act is invoked. That's my concern. More so than if Marines or troops are just deployed to your area, requested by the state, okayed by the president, okayed by Austin. But no, the Insurrection Act is not invoked. I think that's more of a safer route, if you will, for Marines and troops to be in that situation too, because of the bullet points they have to go through. So that's the truth about DOD Directive 5240.01. Hopefully that made sense, and I know I repeated myself a few times, but I wanted to make sure to point out those repetitions of those things. Because yes, this is frightening. Yes, this is a policy change. Yes, you should be aware of it. This is Are You Ready For It? Take care, guys. Have a great day.